Alright, what's up, people? Ugh. Welcome back to the stream. Let me, adjust this momentarily. There we go. Alright. Good. All that stuff looks good. You may be able to hear some humming in the background. I have an air conditioning unit now. I think, to my knowledge, this is the first day where I have both been streaming and had the need to use it, because it's kind of warm today. Funnily enough, like, we got it about a month ago, maybe about a month ago, or something like that. And I didn't really have to use it because it, like, right after we got it, the weather kind of moderated a little bit, which is certainly something. Anyways, look, there's so much to talk about. Oh boy. There is a lot to talk about. There's new stuff, but then I also wanted to talk about other things, more fun things. What? My Wii remote just deactivated for some reason. All right. Of course, I know everybody's gonna be wanting for the Mario Kart World content. And I'm not going to be able to deliver that. Not because I don't have Mario Kart World, actually. I have it right here. I got it in the mail shortly after I got home from vacation. I have the game, I just can't get a Switch 2. Can't find them. And I can actually explain... Here's something interesting. This ties into the interesting stuff I was reading over my break. Not only... do I not have a Switch 2? A lot of people don't. I can explain exactly why there is such a shit show on release for consoles like the Switch 2, right? So, it is not actually an issue of there not being enough supply. I can tell you that right now. Nintendo has made doubly sure, ever since their products have been flying off the shelves at release, that for a highly anticipated console like the Nintendo Switch 2, or a highly, anticipated game release, whatever, although game releases you can get digitally, they are manufacturing enough of them. The manufacturing occurs in Vietnam. There's a Vietnamese company that Nintendo works with. I think either that or they own some factories in Vietnam and they manufacture it that way. They have made enough Switch 2 units to meet the demand for the Switch 2. That's not the issue. The problem is in the shipping and distribution process, right? So the global supply chain is fucked. Hello, Bro the Boss. Welcome. I'm explaining why I don't have a Switch 2 and the problem with the distribution of consoles like that. It's not because Nintendo didn't make enough of them. They made doubly and triply sure that they manufactured enough Switch 2. There are enough of them to go around. The problem is the shipping system and the global supply chain. It is fucked, Kowalski analysis. The global shipping system revolves around profit making. This is not a huge surprise. We live in a global capitalist world. So obviously shipping is going to focus on that, which means any corners that can be cut for the sake of making some extra money, those are going to be cut, which results in a lot of bizarre things, including stores constantly being in a state of bare shelves and understocking. It is actually more profitable, more efficient from a perspective of money making for box stores like Target, Best Buy, GameStop, Walmart, Nintendo's big retailing partners, to not stock enough of anything that they have, because it would be more expensive if they overstocked stuff. They would need additional storage sites, warehouses to store excess inventory. Having too little inventory is just more profitable and creates a better revenue stream than having enough or too much inventory. So the sort of the shipping system sort of revolves around that once things get stateside. That's just one element of it. There's another element of it that because of the sort of deregulation of labor and stuff like that, people who work in the shipping industry no longer have steady, stable, and like resilient connections. There's basically no resilience in the global supply chain. This is one dimension of that. Truck drivers that like transport things, once things get into port, right? You've got like port delivery, in LA or in New York or wherever. You just got a bunch of Switch 2s. Great. They're on these shipping containers. Now a bunch of truck drivers have to drive it across the country or even, more regionally or locally so that they can get them to the stores where they will be housed and sold. Your Amazons, your Walmarts, your Best Buy, your Target, and that sort of stuff, right? The issue is the way that they coordinate this is through fucking WhatsApp and Craigslist. Seriously, the global shipping network is held up by like the goddamn Facebook marketplace. It used to be the case that there would be prearranged legal agreements, contracts written in paper, and a lot of logistics coordination between trucking companies and manufacturing companies, shipping companies. Now all of that stuff is outsourced to a subcontractor of a subcontractor, where you have these truck drivers that are no longer regular wage employees and no longer have these logistics management protections and like union protections and whatever. So they're effectively left to fend for themselves and like basically message whichever port they can get to see if there's like stuff for them to haul. Basically, that creates a very unsteady flow of goods to and from those stores, which are not stocking enough of stuff intentionally, right? That's element number 2. Element number 3 is at the actual ports. When the ships come in, the ships are not operating at peak capacity. The ships are not actually optimized to ensure a stable flow and steady flow of goods and services across the world so that people's needs are met. Again, the name of the game is profit. Cargo ships are too big. They carry a shitload of things into the biggest port that they can find, and then they go back empty. There's stuff that gets shipped out of the United States. Stuff gets shipped from everywhere to everywhere else. There's always stuff for these ships to pick up, but it's more profitable if they sort of make separate runs, because those represent separate contracts or separate impromptu agreements where payments are made. If you are being truly efficient with your workload, trying to make sure things are steadily moving from one place to another, then, your ship is full more frequently, more of the time, and you're making less money, right? Because it's like, if half of your contract, your shipping contract overseas, is spent with an empty ship, that means that you can get twice as much money for the same amount of goods. Does that make sense? So that's the transoceanic shipping element. But then the element number 4, again having to do with transoceanic shipping, the ships being too big actually has major implications for whether or not countries are able to receive these goods and distribute them. There are not many ports that are big enough, or rather, there are many ports that aren't big enough, I should say. There's a lot of ports, one way or the other. There are many ports that are actually not big enough to accommodate these big, giant, shipping tankers, right? So there's like a good percentage of ports in the United States and in countries across the world that just never see use, because the ships that would be bringing things to and fro are too big to effectively dock and unload at those ports. It would overwhelm those ports. And because shipping has been ever since like the 80s and 90s has gravitated towards like these much bigger and bigger ships, these ports have fallen out of use, because that's most of the ships that there are these really big tankers, right? So you have, the ships are too big, ports can't take them. They're only hauling stuff half of the time to maximize how much money they make per haul. And then like truck drivers no longer have the kind of infrastructure supporting them that they used to, and like stores have a vested interest in not stocking enough things to sell them, right? And like all of this shit, it like leads to Nintendo can produce as much of their shit as they can to satisfy all of the demand for it to such an extent that we should never be seeing shortages of this, but yet you still go to the store and it's like an absolute, like it's a scene trying to get a Switch 2 because they'll get there first thing in the morning and then within 30 minutes the consoles are all gone. And that is actually a capitalism problem. I am telling you right now that if you don't have a Nintendo Switch 2, if you can't find one, that is capitalism's fault. Because the whole global shipping network has been set up to basically be horridly inefficient from a perspective of consistency. It is massively efficient from a perspective of profit, but otherwise it's really not. You know? Gotta switch to, like, I just wanted Mario Kart World. Well, that makes one of us. I'm on the other end of that. I couldn't get a Nintendo Switch 2, but I could, funnily enough, I had no trouble finding a physical copy of Mario Kart World. In fact, I'll open it right now. This came in the mail just a couple of days ago. I always typically prefer to buy physical media. See? There it is. Mario Kart World. But I still can't find the Switch 2 because those consoles are fucking flying off the shelves. You know? And that's because of all those problems with the global supply chain and the shipping networks and stuff like that. Basically, we need to reform our way out of capitalism, because if, like, the global supply chain is extremely fragile with all the circumstances that I just described, and in order to have a stable, globalized economy that is fit for purpose and that can meet people's needs, you actually need a lot of built-in resiliency. Think about how in 2021, what was it? The Ever Given, that tanker got stuck in the Suez Canal and held up shipping for like months, and it had massive implications for countries all over the world because one ship got stuck, you know, in one trade route. And that's partly why, is because there weren't these separate, like, any one thing going wrong could break the whole supply chain, right? If we had, if there was more effort put into, stocking things in advance, stocking more than enough of goods, at least that are non-perishable, that don't, like, have a fucking shelf life, like food or something like that, if there was more effort put into, or if the priority was making sure that ports are all being utilized if they can be, so that we don't have these giant fucking abomination tankers, and making sure that these tankers aren't empty half of the time, so that goods are moving in as high a quantity as we can reasonably get them to be. Again, to have this global supply chain fit for purpose to meet people's needs around the world and do so consistently. It's all that inconsistency that builds up to make it so that one ship getting stuck breaks the whole supply chain, or also that the Houthis can block the Red Sea trade routes, and that has permanent implications for everybody everywhere else in the world. In the instance of the Houthis, they can use that to put some, pressure on Israel, who's doing a genocide, but nonetheless, it represents a critical weakness of the global supply chain, one that shouldn't even exist if you have an economy this big and this complicated, which so many countries depend so heavily on, So as corny as it sounds, I'll say it again, the reason that you can't get a Switch 2 is because of capitalism. Like, that's capitalism's fault. If we had a socialist economy that was organized around a democratic ownership of production, distribution, and exchange, even if it was like market socialism, which is like socialism light, you would not see these issues, not nearly as frequently anyways, because the incentives would be not aligned towards profit, you know, and corner cutting. What point is the money if you can't fucking buy anything, or if like everybody's starving, right? One of the physical copy, but the bundle only comes with a digital one. Physical copy is like £40 more separately. Yeah, I made the conscious decision that I was okay with eating an extra cost if I got the physical copy, because the digital copy is subject to, like, if they shut down some kind of online service or something like that, I might just suddenly not be able to access it, and I really don't want that, you know? So I might even make that a segment. Future me cut it there. Maybe. Or maybe not. Because the that spiel that I went on is actually directly connected to another thing that I did while I was gone. I went to I went down to North Carolina. We went to the beach. It was fun. And I did a lot of reading when I was down there. In fact, I tried to specifically limit the amount of stuff I was bringing with me. I think I just had my laptop and a couple of books, you know, apart from obviously my phone in case somebody needed to message me and stuff like that. And so if I wasn't like reading my email, I was probably reading a book. And the book that I read, it actually explained the issue that I just went through kind of sloppily. I'm sure that Mr. Unlearning Economics on YouTube could give you a much better account of it. But he wrote a book. I actually pre-ordered it because I thought it'd be cool and interesting, and I learned a lot. It is like a modern analysis of globalized capitalist economy, both in its domestic and foreign implications. One of the chapters was all about like international trade and the global supply chain and stuff like that, and that's where I learned about all these flaws and how they contribute to us like producing vastly more than is needed to maintain a certain quality of life, and still like there are massive shortages in places like the United States, you know. Was watching an alternate history video on if Al Gore won the 2000 election. To be honest, I don't think that much would change in the long run, as problems are far deeper and more structural than that. I think we still end up Tea Party, MAGA, Trump fascism at some point down the road. And I think I agree with you. I think I do agree that like whether it was Al Gore or like George Bush, I mean basically like in a system like the one we have, it's sort of like the candidate you choose basically affects how quickly certain things happen, right? Like, you know, if Al Gore won, it might not be the case that, you know, you get all of the stuff that the Bush administration did, but, you know, still, again, you know, like you said, a liberal, not going to really address the deeper structural issues. And so, you know, the same general problems and malaise would persist. And yeah, eventually you would have the right-wing populism because, you know, you saw that in other countries that didn't have an Al Gore or a George Bush or a Donald Trump. They sort of created their own Donald Trump. That's why so many right-wing world leaders in the 2010s were compared to Donald Trump. He was just the president of the United States. Right-wing populism was sort of on the uptick everywhere. And there are other countries where you could see analogous examples of when they didn't choose the conservatives, at least nominally speaking, you know, like with Blair in the UK, or the like the moderate, you know, center right faction in the SPD in Germany, or the liberals in France, or like whoever else, right? I'm sure there's some better examples, but you get the idea, you know. We have some examples from other countries that elected a liberal, like a somewhat more left-leaning candidate and party, rather than a more right-leaning candidate and party, and they still ended up basically at the same place as the United States did. That is to say, with a resurgent far right. If anything, it could have accelerated it, assuming the 2008 crash still happens, which I think it would. Al Gore and Dems get the blame, etc., etc. You know what? You might be right. I think there is a salient point there, because Obama was like Obama actually ran as a populist. He was kind of like a faux populist centrist, and I do have to wonder, you know, if Al Gore represented the sort of liberal, like nominally slightly left, you know, institutionalism, and he was the face of the 2008 financial crisis, you know, like kind of like how Bush is for us right now. I wonder, yeah, it might have been a right-wing populist that took the mantle in 2008. We might be engaging in this whole dance a lot sooner, and maybe potentially even with less danger on the horizon, right? Because one of the biggest problems of Obama's presidency is that he was supposed to be the change candidate, and then he did all of jack shit because he's a liberal, you know? And by all of jack shit, I mean he, like, specifically kept all the structural factors in place that caused the 2008 crisis, right? That, like, the government bailed out the big banks, and like, they fucking forced unions to enter into some, like, very serious concessions, and, you know, did a lot of pretty economically right-wing policy making, but did it in a way that sort of pacified people. Yeah, .ru. We get some of those in chat sometimes. I don't know. Maybe this is another accelerationism W. I've kind of like, I'll be real. I have actually been quite on the like accelerationism train because of like the way that people react to things being done blatantly and very messily and incompetently in their faces, right? Like, you know, you can compare the difference between Reagan and Clinton, who had very similar politics, especially economically speaking, both anti-union, both anti-social safety net. Bill Clinton and his government were just better at realizing those politics, at realizing that political agenda than Reagan and his government were, you know? And so I feel like, you know, Al Gore would have just been probably a more competent version of Bush. You know, and maybe they don't do as many things that flagrantly violate people's rights in that sense. But, you know, it's very easy for me to see them kind of quietly fanning the flames of the crisis to some extent. And you know, something like that. Anyways, I got really off track. Yeah, over the course of the vacation, I did a lot of reading. I read Unlearning Economics book, Why We're Getting Poorer. It's a pretty good book. And I learned many things. I'd be hard-pressed to recount all of them, because that's kind of how reading works. I fastidiously took notes and all that. There were sections about the global supply chain, about the dynamic of unions and company like leadership and management and stuff. And surprisingly, like, I was kind of surprised to see that even the most bare bones rational assessment of the flaws of a global economy in the 21st century, like any rational, comprehensive assessment of economics, has to lead to socialism. Like, seriously, all roads lead to socialism, because all of the problems that are systemic in the modern economy are things that have been, like, there's been some version of them for so long, they've just never been addressed. It, like, to borrow some Marxian parlance, there's just these perennial contradictions, these incentives that lead to bad outcomes and whatever else, but that lend themselves very well to profit seeking, that have just never been addressed, even partially. You know, a lot of these factors, like the you know, ships being too big, about the sort of justification of wealth in the hands of those who have it, the overdependence on money and markets for everything, including labor and like food and the essentials. It is like it's an economic death knell that's just been getting louder and louder as time has gone on, you know? And it actually goes pretty far beyond the social democratic politics, even of the 20th century at its most radical points, you know? Because like you can do all of this social safety net construction and spending and all these, you know, labor protection programs and whatnot, but if the same structures, the same incentives, the same relationships to production remain in place, then like we're gonna eventually wind up at the same point of crisis. In fact, Unlearning Economics and Marx are not the only people who talked about this. You know who else talked about this? Albert Einstein, whose book I also brought with me to the beach and read a little bit of. You know, like the act of production, we've run into massive issues of waste because of how production works. And, you know, waste and human misery, which seem contradictory when we're producing as many things for as many people as we are in the current day, right? We produce so much shit for so many people. Everybody's needs should be able to be met comfortably with, like, room to spare, like plenty of room to spare. But for some reason, they're not. And by some reason, I mean that, like, production doesn't happen to meet people's needs. Production happens for profit. And that's the same end to which labor exists in a capitalist economy. So anything that doesn't, like, directly serve that end has to be retooled to. You know, the work that people do has to be, like, abstracted in some form, or you know, detached from the actual things that they're making, you know? Effectively, it's just not profitable to meet everybody's needs. And that's a problem that's become more and more evident over time, you know? Even in 1940, there was a problem of overwork and overproduction, as Albert Einstein observed, that, like, everybody didn't need to work 40 hours a week. If we wanted to achieve full employment, which is a thing that many socialists want to do, you could do so by reducing the amount of working hours that people have. Easy. Now, instead of having fewer people working more hours, you have more people working fewer hours, but everyone's working. Everybody's contributing to society, and the labor gets spread pretty, you know, a lot more evenly. And depending on how much the hours are reduced, there's actually resiliency built into that, where if somebody is, you know, if somebody's sick, it's, you know, it's whatever. But if there's, for some reason, a need to increase the amount of production that's happening, people can take on some additional hours because you wouldn't be working 40 hours a week. Like, for shit's sake, we could be working 10 hours a week right now for the same amount of real production that's like currently happening, you know? But the reason we're not is because there needs to be that same relationship to production, that sort of slavish relationship, a subservient relationship to production, in order for profits and revenues to keep flowing. Revenues of money in a market system. Again, here I am, like, inartfully explaining this shit, but it's interesting stuff. One of my favorite YouTubers, Jimmy the Giant, is more SOCDEM, social market economy lefty, but he acknowledges the same thing about structures eventually leading us ending up the same position we are now. Yeah, and it really is, like, whether you, like, whatever degree to which you acknowledge it, it is eventually, like, you have to fix the market system, which entails getting rid of the market system, you know? The market was never really, like, for a lot of the theorists of the 18th century, when markets were this hot new political thing, they, for most of their parts, they clearly did not want to, and they explicitly said as much, they did not want to have markets applied to things that were essential for life. For example, food and shelter and clothing. You know? I mean, luxury items, they made some exceptions there, like a nice coat. You know? But, yeah. Back in the 60s, people were predicting the average work week would be down to like 15 hours by 2000 based on the rate of automation, but instead bullshit jobs were invented as capitalism and welfare. Yeah, I mean, basically that is what happened. And they were right. In fact, that might have even been a conservative estimate, given the digitization that happened in the 70s and 80s. A lot of work got automated and people no longer needed to work that much. But if they didn't work as much, then they would not have the same relationship to production. They would not be as subservient to the owners of production and productive forces as they were currently. So instead of allowing the automation to benefit people, they invented more work to be done. Busy work, pointless work, meaningless work, bullshit jobs. And that's why those exist. All the while, you still can't have full employment, because if you have full employment, then the workers have bargaining power, a lot of bargaining power. So there's a balance that the owning class has to strike between keeping the hours up and keeping the employment down. You know, that's the whole idea of the reserve army of unemployed labor. The workers have less bargaining power and are less of a threat to the capitalists if they're being pit against each other in their work and, for a position to work. Because there's a real credible threat of material deprivation if they don't accept very harsh conditions. So yeah, bullshit jobs, effectively, it is all just welfare programs for the capitalists. They're sort of like, it's like a kneecap on the working class that exists to preserve that relationship, you know? And sometimes bullshit jobs, like, pay decently well, but it's really alienating work. That it's, like, pointless work. And it keeps, like, the important thing about it is it keeps you in a position where you are, like, dependent on the owning class for an income. You know, they still have you by the balls. That's the point. Socialists, again, and this is a thing that's been a known quantity to socialists since the fucking 19th century, you know? And it's sort of like other people may just be figuring it out now. I mean, like, welcome to the party, obviously, but, like, Jesus. Ooh. Uh-oh, I just realized the sprites on the mini-map are not showing the way that they should. I will have to fix that at some point. I sincerely did not think I would hit that. I don't know what made me think that, but okay. You do this. Okay, finally I did the ending section correctly. And there we go, first place. Wow, my mouse is all over the place. Okay. Good. Alright, next race. I now I want to I guess start on actually no, before I even start on the thing that I really wanted to get to in the news cycle, there's two more things that I've thought worth it to mention. First, I said on the last stream before I went on vacation, I said that I was going to try to find some literature on labor vouchers. And not for lack of trying, I couldn't find anything, which makes sense. Labor vouchers are not a very common thing, right? Anytime I've looked for, vouchers, as much as I tried to fine tune the search on like JSTOR, most of it came up with school vouchers. But nothing about labor vouchers. Even the Wikipedia article for labor vouchers basically encompassed the thought exercise and conversation that I had with my dad about labor vouchers before I looked it up. It really doesn't seem like there's a whole lot about it. I learned that I guess some socialists contextually supported it and other socialists were not too keen on it, because labor vouchers represented a vector by which the economy could remain monetized in a way. One of the critiques that they had was that, if you sort of compromise with this half measure of labor vouchers, money will just kind of find its way back into the economic lexicon again, and you'll have the same problem. Which I guess makes sense. You want to transition as quickly as you can directly to a non-monetary economy, a post-money society. So I couldn't read much about that. So I went to another thing that I kind of wanted to read about, which is homework. Now I had heard and kind of knew from I don't know, the online olive branch, I guess, that there was discourse around whether or not homework was useful, and the consensus among at least among who I had heard from seemed to be that homework is actually not very useful and doesn't serve much of a purpose outside of, busy work. Essentially, it is the school version of, bullshit jobs. And so I went looking for some research to that effect. What is, how useful is homework really in its purported purpose, helping students learn and remember the shit from class and whatnot. Turns out not very. I found a review of studies, pretty comprehensive one that took a look at data from studies done over a few decades in the late 20th century, I think going into the early 21st century. So it's pretty recent, scientifically speaking. And there was actually repeatedly, every time studies were done on the efficacy of homework in its purported goals, helping students learn and furthering educational outcomes, repeatedly, they found zero evidence that homework had any relationship to the learning process. One way or the other as well. There was no evidence that homework directly hurt the learning process, but there was also no evidence that homework made a meaningful impact to help the learning process. And yet, what was really confusing was, and I guess is like I don't know, it speaks to the strength of social convention and how much people fucking hate kids, conservatives particularly, is that even when academics did research on homework and found in their data collection that homework did not have a meaningful impact on educational outcomes, on the capability of students to learn and how much they learned relative to students that maybe had less homework or didn't have homework or something like that, they still recommended that homework be assigned, and in some cases even that more homework be assigned. In fact, the only concrete evidence there was to the effect of homework, outside of things that were just a self-justifying loop, homework, the relationship between homework and standardized tests just being copy and pasted from homework assignments, obviously they're going to be related to each other. When you controlled for other variables, homework didn't really do anything. But the evidence for where homework did do something was in the emotional state of the children. Yes, homework did start as a punishment, and that is reflected in the data of what homework does to young kids' psyche. The only discernible, measurable effect that homework has is to build resentment among children for the school, for the school environment, for the education system. Like it made children grumpy and not like school and not like having to do the homework, right? That was the only, to the effect that you could measure a meaningful impact of homework on anything. That was the effect of homework. That's what it did. The intent of a system is its outcomes, right? Remember this. Anytime we're talking about something structural, something systemic, the intent of something is what it does. And what homework does is make children miserable. And it literally doesn't do anything else. It makes children miserable. It could also contribute to them being antisocial, because that's time they have to spend in a solitary environment, working on their own, basically doing busy work where they don't get to be, playing with friends or talking to their parents about what they learned that day or something like that. Homework is pure, like, to the extent that you can measure whether homework is a positive or negative influence, it is strictly a negative influence. And yet, even still, there were a lot of academics that contradicted their own data sets and data findings to recommend that kids be assigned more homework, which is fucking bizarre. And interestingly enough, there's this weird gap in research. There's this trend that sort of confirms that homework exists basically only as a punishment. In the 1910s and 1920s, when the research process was just starting to take off, like the scientific method being applied in an institutional fashion to social research was like a new thing, and people were doing it for everything that they could think of. Some of it good, some of it bad. And that's also the time when like homework was just starting to become a thing as a punishment for children. A lot of studies back in the day found that, homework is purely just a punitive measure and doesn't really serve any constructive purpose for school students, And a lot of the researchers from the time recommended that schools not, assign homework, as was the emerging trend, right? But after the Second World War, in the post-war period, the academic consensus took a turn, where they were very sloppy with their research methods, probably because of how recent homework was, and also because there was an overriding social bias to justify homework before the data collection had even started. A lot of academia in the mid-20th century said homework is good, actually. We need to be assigning more of it so that we can be competitive or something like that, right? Even though all of the measurements at the time indicated that countries that assigned less homework than America, the Soviet Union, and China actually had better educational outcomes for their students overall. And of course, that's not controlling for a whole lot of stuff, but, you start getting to the late 20th century, academics are still riding on that overriding social bias, but the data just didn't support it. Even with like sloppy data collection methods, they couldn't make the argument without blatantly contradicting the facts that they were recording, which is that even when you could see a group of students that were being assigned more homework and came out ahead of students that were being assigned less homework, there were other factors that were easily attributable to that gap. For example, income, the resources available both to the kids' families and the kids' schools, how much time the kid was spending alone at home, whether or not they had people available, teachers, TAs, parents, whatever, who could help them with their homework or help them with schoolwork or help them with understanding the stuff that they were learning, right? A lack of social and economic resources was the real explanation for this gap, even where it seemed that, also these students are being assigned more or less homework, and I win, just like that. They disconnected me because I'm talking about too much nerd shit. So you start seeing that rift in the 80s and 90s, and then in the 2000s, up until and including now, you start to see this consensus shift back. Now that it's been about 100 years since the introduction of homework as a standard, to punish students for no fucking reason at all, people are starting to acknowledge what the data says, that homework does not meaningfully contribute to educational outcomes, and that if that is the case, we should stop assigning homework, because the default position should be that if you don't need to assign extra work, then you don't assign extra work. If you don't need to assign, you know, an extra like assignment or whatever, then you shouldn't, you know, because that's just unnecessary. It's subjecting kids to more work for no gain, no reason, you know. But it could very well be that the incentives to keep homework around are very similar to the incentives to keep the 40-hour work week and to suppress methods by which we could achieve full employment, is because it's not actually about the educational outcomes, I think. There are a lot of flaws with the education system, one of which being the overfocus on STEM, the other of which being the overfocus on homework. Education increasingly is you know, experiencing these flaws where it seems to no longer be meant to produce people that are comprehensively well educated and adept at critical thought. Rather, it is meant to produce automatons that can work and follow the directions of their bosses and basically do what they're told, right? I guess, you know, in a way, I could bring it back to that being the logical end state of a capitalist education system, is that, you know, the interest here is to make machines of men so that they do not, like, think for themselves and develop any sort of liberatory instincts. And that would also go quite a distance to explain why AI has had such an easy time like becoming such a regular fixture in the classroom, because it is an antisocial, anti-critical framework, you know, and it frankly, it serves very well to aid the capitalist education system in its end of producing unthinking, stupid automatons, you know. Yeah, it's like the final nail in the coffin, right? It's like it brings the whole picture together, but we have to understand that homework, the overfixation on STEM, the defunding of the social sciences, the defunding of education in general, you know, the extensive efforts at resegregation of the education system, the resistance to integration, that, you know, the income gap and whatever, you know, the constant, like, in fact, like, not even just the defunding, the de-emphasis of the social sciences and art as, like, stupid and trivial. Like, these are all part of the same monster that AI is, like, the beating heart of, if that makes sense. You know? It's like these were all malignant tumors in the patient, and the patient has cancer, and these things are all malignant tumors. And then AI is just it hitting metastasis, metastasizing to the bone, you know? So, you know, the absolute state of academia, because academia is having some problems with AI as well. The absolute state of the education system, it's pretty fucked up. Overfocus on attendance is a serious flaw too. That is also true. The overfocus on attendance in a way that is reminiscent of prisons, because prisons also the prison companies, I should say, the companies that build and design prisons also build and design schools. Schools are built and designed as prisons to hold children. They should be social facilities where children can go for the day. But fundamentally, I actually don't think we would have problems with attendance, both in, like, overemphasizing and enforcing it, and with people wanting so badly to skip class, to skip school. If you made school a desirable place to be, like, if you made school a place where kids could reasonably expect it to go and learn and have fun, kids will want to go to school, you know? And again, it's part of that misalignment of these incentive structures, that the point of school is not, at least not anymore, to produce a well-educated and thoughtful new generation of people, but rather to turn kids into machines that can work and be, like, submissive and subservient. That was risky going for that. I don't think that was even like that great, but I got a mushroom, so it worked out, and then I just got fucked up by a random green shell. Oh, poor bastard. Just don't see how awarding kids for not getting, for... Oop. Dang. Awarding kids for not getting, well, stressing their developing bodies while ill is remotely productive for, anyone. Yeah, no, it's not. Except to the end of, like, maintaining a power dynamic and relationship where kids never really achieve independence and the capability of thinking critically, right? Also, I heard recently, I didn't know this until I read that book by Unlearning Economics. Apparently, what we know as private schools in America are called public schools in the UK. I did not know that. And then I guess what Americans call public school would be, what, grammar schools? There's a goofy little thing. Also, I should mention, this occurred to me several times when I was reading the book and reading that study. Very confusing. The public part is an anachronism, which essentially refers to how anyone is welcome to send their kids there if they pay, of course. Okay, yeah, I kind of figured that was why the word public was there. Yeah. For a lot of these things, they're actually not very productive. A lot of these, you know, the overassignment of homework, the excessive focus on attendance and making sure kids are like little wind-up soldiers and like, you know, going back to overproduction and overworking people and having a mass of people that's constantly unemployed, having such a fragile supply chain and all the rest. None of that is terribly productive. It doesn't contribute to society. In fact, it detracts from society, even from a purely material production perspective, right? But the thing about it is that a lot of there's a point beyond which the owning class is actually no longer interested in material production. They're interested in what's called relative profit. You know, it feels like Metal Gear talking about this, because we can acknowledge that, like, any one of these billionaires and like multimillionaires or whatever don't have to be this evil for the incentives to line up this way. But as a class, their interest is to make everything worse for everyone, even if that includes themselves, as long as they remain on top. And the gap between them and the working class widens. Even if in a material sense, like, I'm bringing this shit back to the book 1984. Like, you know, I don't talk about that shit enough on this channel. Like, even if the quality of life for both of them like for both the owning and working classes is wretched, you know, it is in the interest of the owning class to keep the existence wretched, or even make it more so, if it means that the power gap between them and the working class widens, because then their position on top of the heap is more assured, you know? Yeah, it's maintaining their position on top of the heap. And if they have to make everything worse for everybody, they'll do it. And they will make their own lives worse, more inconvenient, shorter, more fraught with illness and instability on a material level, like fraught with hunger and real scarcity, if it means that the working class is in a more wretched position relative to them. That is relative profit, because while everybody has lost ground, they have relatively gained ground. The gap is now wider. Yeah, it fucking like Bug's Life was a great example of this. It's not about the food; it's about keeping the ants in line. I swear, but they fucking brought the ghost of Marx to some of these movies to write the script. Um, that's also why a lot of neoliberals champion the rising tide lifts all boats. One of the issues with that is that you could have people in the third world that operate on a starvation wage, that are in extreme poverty, earning something like $2 a day. Or even let's say they're earning $5 a day, right? Just to like bump the number up a little bit. So they're somewhat above the UN extreme poverty line, right? But still very poor. If the rising tide lifts all boats, then like let's say there's a 100% increase in the wealth enjoyed by like the whole world. You know, economic growth has made it so that people are earning twice as much across the board or more. Of course, things aren't actually distributed this evenly, even as a term of percentages. But for the sake of this example, I'm sort of flattening it to that effect. Usually, this is actually an unduly charitable picture of neoliberal political economy. Usually, it's much worse. That salary that is being earned by this Joe Schmo in the third world is now, instead of $5 a day, they're earning $10 a day. For them, that's a huge upgrade. But consider that, you know, if we're talking about even just a like low-paid employee that gets $22,000 a year in the developed world, then that would, or I guess $11,000, then their wealth went from $11,000 a year, or their income went from $11,000 a year to $22,000 a year. You know? So it's like the difference between $5 and $10 and the difference between $11,000 and $22,000. And then you add on top of that there's some people way on top of the heap, you know, the really wealthy people that own 100 million in stock options or whatever, right? And that's their portfolio. Their wealth has now doubled as well, which means they now own 200 million in stock options, which is incomprehensibly larger than thousands of both of those previous types of people combined, you know? And that is another way that actually the gap is widening. That's another example where, like, the issue is not that, like, the growth is happening, it's that the relative profit is occurring, right? It goes both ways. Which is the purpose of the what is it, the new optimists, those guys, and the effective altruists or whoever, where it's like one person should have all the money and be good so that they can do good things with all the money. Smiley face. Meanwhile, the money just accumulates passively. That's what money does when you have so much of it that it becomes incomprehensible, is that it ceases to be money and it becomes capital. You know, you can't go to Jeff Bezos' bank account and find billions of dollars in there. What you can do is look at his stock portfolio and measure the sort of speculative value of all the things that he owns, of all the resources that he controls, and you total that up together, and that is representative of his wealth, and he can leverage that. Yeah, it's like, it is truly like time. I mean, they say time is money, right? When you reach a big enough number, it loses all meaning. Yeah, wow, MLG. Wow. But yeah, anyways, I have now gushed for about an hour about how much I hate capitalism, and that's what I've spent my beach trip doing, is reading about this stuff and thinking about it. But yeah, Unlearning Economics, cool YouTube channel. He wrote a cool book, and I would recommend it. It's a very interesting read. Of course, it's very dry because it's economics, although he cracks some jokes because he's a funny guy. What's also funny is I found myself reading it in my head with his voice. You know, Unlearning Economics has a pretty distinct accent and narrative style, and when I was reading it, I could hear him. And the music he has going in his videos, I could hear him saying the lines and the the paragraphs as I was reading through them. And I think to some extent that actually helped me understand it, because I was like imagining it took some amount of effort to imagine something being said in a voice that wasn't mine. Or wasn't like the mental image of my voice. And of course, I also took notes on the margin, and if I felt like I was losing focus, I would actually go back and reread the paragraph that I just read. I was really interested in making sure that I was paying attention to the things that I was reading in the book. So that's all that now is like a recount of the reading that I did over the over my break. I did some other stuff as well, but I think I want to get to that like that story, that's a news story first, and then I can talk about the stuff that I did over the break that was not reading. Though that's probably going to have to be after this race. Oh, dang. I forgot you're not supposed to trick there. You're supposed to wheelie over that. Oh, well, poor bastard. He hit the wall. I can see second there. Oh, okay. Red shell. Alright. Ooh, chuck another one. Sorry, I had to do it to him. Hit second? Nice. Okay. I bet bet some of you might not have actually heard about this, especially the non-Americans. I don't know if you guys have heard about this one. Americans definitely have. It is not the protests in LA, which is why I prefaced it like that. I'm saving that for a little bit later. It is from Politico. You essentially destroyed any chance I have, DNC chair told David Hogg in a private meeting. Ken Martin expressed frustration and self-doubt in a meeting with other party leaders, including a 2-minute recording obtained by Politico. Now, this is the scoop that I'm here for. We're actually going to listen to this. Wait, shit. It's not playing desktop audio. Properties? But I think my desktop audio is improperly set up for this. Anyways. Yeah, it's been known for a while that there's been an internal fight in the Democratic Party between the chair, Ken Martin, and the co-chair, David Hogg. David Hogg is one of the survivors of the Parkland mass shooting in 2017, I think, or maybe it was early 2018, when he was a high school student, and that was a lever by which he got into politics. You know, he is very big on gun safety and stuff like that, which is a more traditionally liberal position that I don't usually align with, but when it's stuff like red flag laws and like background checks, it's like, okay, yeah, obviously we need that shit, right? But what he's also developed a reputation for is being progressive in other respects as well. He was part of that generation, sort of the last non-TikTok high school generation, basically. And one of his the reason that the Democratic Party's been fighting him so hard is that he has said, like, yeah, let's primary all these weak, useless, feckless Democrats and get them out so that we can have Democrats that actually believe in something and will fight for the positions that they nominally support, right? Instead of like testing everything by committee and putting everything in front of focus groups and just like wasting a shit ton of money on basically nothing. You know? The party was very quick to spring into action to ice out David Hogg. He was the co-chair of the DNC, but they actually fired him. The actual moment that he stuck to his guns once he was in that position of power, the DNC was like, all right, nope, that's it. We can't have you anymore. You know, we can't have you doing that anymore. That blue shell hit the person in second for some reason. I don't know why. Alright, desktop audio, please. What do we got? Speakers? Is this...
And I'll say...
Yes! Okay. We have audio from Politico.
Look, it has plenty of warts, and we're all trying to change those, for sure.
This is Ken Martin talking, the chair of the Democratic National Committee. This is like Democratic Party leadership. This is about as high as it goes.
But the longer we continue this fight, the harder it is for us to actually do what we all want to do, which is make a difference in this country again. So I deeply respect you, David. I too was looking forward to working with you, but this has created a situation, and I'll be very honest with you, for the first time in my 100 days on this job, and Jessica knows this.
Oh, 100 days, huh?
The other night I said to myself for the first time, I don't know if I want to do this anymore.
Bro, you're...
And partly,
let's keep going.
Partly not because of the stress and all the naysayers, right? I'm used to that. I've spent 14 years as a chair. I'm used to getting beat up on. But, you know, this is really everything, you know, from this election, this credentials report, and how Malcolm's been treated in this, to, you know, the fact the election itself, how Shasti and Gina were treated in this.
I don't know the people who he's referring to. I'm assuming that these are other high-ranking party members.
I'm just quite frustrated to be in this position, because what you've done, whether you like it or not, or know it or not, David, is I'm trying to, no one knows who the hell I am, right? I'm trying to get my sea legs underneath of me and actually develop any amount of credibility.
Why the fuck not, huh? Why doesn't anybody know who you are? I had to, like, yeah, when he's saying nobody knows who I am, he's kind of right. I have to explain who Ken Martin is to explain, like, why he's actually, like, a powerful person. And, brother, you said yourself, you've been on the job for 100 days and you have 14 years of experience from being a chair of other political organizations. Dog, you should not be getting your sea legs under you on day 100 on the job. Like, Jesus fucking Christ. Right? And it seems like what he's building to here, all of his complaints, oh, how Malcolm has been treated, how these other people have been treated, how I've been treated, you know, I'm very frustrated, whatever. This is about his feelings being hurt. He got his fifis hurt. And now he's going on about all this or something. Let me get around this bend and then I will unpause the video.
So I can go out there and raise the money and do the job I need to
oh, of course it's the fundraising.
And again, I don't think you intended this, but you essentially destroyed any chance I have to show the leadership that I need to. So it's really frustrating. Jane.
Dog, he's crying. No, pause. Bro, I don't know if you heard that. There were some pauses there. I wanted to be sure. There was one, like, earlier on, and there was one late in the video. Dog, he cried. The fucking, like, the party boss, the boss of the Democratic Party, the chair of the DNC, was fucking crying because David Hogg was yelling at him to do something for fuck's sake, you know? It's hard for me to, like, express how much I hate the Democrats in moments like this, because this is, like, this is a reaction in earnest. This is not like, you know, Ken Martin is an older guy. He's probably, I don't know, he'd probably be about my parents' age or something like that. He seems like he's about that age, right? Like in his 50s, maybe he's 60, I don't know. He's not, like, young and savvy enough to be one of the grifter types that will feign certain things for attention. Dog, he's really crying because of that. Which is fucking pathetic, right? Like, you, by your own admission, cop to the fact that after 14 years of being a political chair, of being a chair of other political organizations, you've been nominated and appointed as the head of the Democratic National Committee, the biggest political party in the United States. The Democratic Party is actually larger than the Republican Party in terms of membership and money. It may not seem like it, but they are. And he's saying, dog, I'm only 100 days in. Give me some time to put my sea legs under me. Sniveling and crying. The Democrats chose this. The Democrats chose this guy. You know, the delegates? They hate you. They hate you more than the Republicans hate you. They hate the concept of, like, having to do stuff. They actually, like, in order to actively hate you, the Republicans would need to see you as people, which they fundamentally do not, right? Republicans would see you as an obstacle to be overcome. In that way, they are actually much better at real politics, right? The Democrats, though, are such weak, sniveling baby bitches that they are capable of acknowledging your humanity insofar as it serves for them to feel bad and cry like a wimp when you tell them to do something. That's all David Hogg did. David Hogg got into the DNC and ran for co-chair on the platform of, like, we need to primary ineffective Democrats so that we can get more effective Democrats. Literally, David Hogg, the extent to which his position is known by the Democratic establishment is that he's anti-incompetent leadership. And the problem is, the Democratic leadership all know that they're incompetent, and the problem is, this guy wants to get rid of us. But they're not usually the kind of, like, cunning and like, very, I don't know, realpolitik-oriented cutthroat the Republicans are. It's like they're a paranoid, sniveling old man who is just, like, afraid of the light. That's what the Democrats, like, that's the kind of image that this conjures to me. You know? This, I think, deserves to be the death knell of the Democratic Party. Basically. The Democrats are already basically doing nothing to fight the Republicans. You know, the only thing that we've ever seen from Democratic leadership is, like, grifty book tours and rolling over when they have the opportunity to. And, like, you know, boring nothing statements that belong in the 1990s, both for the format and language. You know? They're not a real political party anymore. They're like a shell, a husk. And of course that's by design. There are structural influences and systemic forces that have made it that way, you know, because they used to actually have some degree of spine in the 70s, the 60s and 70s. But, you know, they're kind of not allowed to because they depend on wealthy donors. And those wealthy donors are part of the owning class. And the owning class prefers Republicans. So they get mad at you whenever you deviate from Republicans. And that, over time, has eroded the Democratic Party to this absolute state that it's in right now. Oh, he's 51. Okay, Ken Martin is 51 years old. I was right when he said he was probably in his 50s. God damn, David Hogg even compromised on his proposal that they primary other like party officials or politicians and whatnot. Saying like, look, I'll even be willing to like, what did it say? It said something like put up a firewall. Let me see this. Yeah, Hogg had pitched a compromise suggesting an internal firewall that would bar him from access to sensitive information in primaries in his group. In primaries, his group leaders we deserve were involved with. So, like, basically, I'll take a break from that group, but just have the same kind of mission. Martin rejected the compromise. Literally, David Hogg was like, look, the most important thing is that we be anti-incompetence within our own party. We need to cultivate strong leadership and strong politicians with political aspirations and ambitions for the country, right? And we need to get these weak, sniveling bitches out of office that are currently, ceding ground endlessly to the Republican Party. But Ken Martin, being one of those sniveling, spineless bitches that does nothing but cede ground to the Republicans, said, oh no, that would still be bad for me particularly, and basically everybody else he works with. So he rejected it. And, he can't take a punch. That, like, these people, these politicians who have like known nothing but inertial power, rely so heavily on that power that all it takes is for somebody to bully them, and they will cry like this. Legitimately, this is like a context in which I am pro-bullying. In school, bullying can have like a profoundly negative psychological impact on students and stuff like that. And, in that sense, like, yeah, obviously all the like anti-bullying campaigns or whatever in school are very well justified. It leads to, in fact, a lot of students punching their own ticket early, which is really bad. But in the real world, this guy has like so much power. If they wanted to, they could instantly mount a meaningful challenge to the Republican Party, and that would be reflected like by the time that 2026 came around. Like, legitimately, if they wanted to, they could turn things around that fast. The issue is they don't want to. And they so don't want to that they are actually willing to undercut and sabotage anybody that is trying to turn things around for them, right? It's not just they don't want to turn things around. They ideologically oppose anything that would help them win. Like, anything that would help them win elections, that would bring them into the 21st century and sort of adjust the Democrats to the new political question of socialism or barbarism, they fundamentally object to. They are a dinosaur party run by dinosaurs in the political sense, and they are committed to maintaining that on their way to the grave. Well. I see you talking about the leak audio. Yes. And in fact, we listened to it earlier. The leaked audio from Politico. DNC chair admits, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. I forgot. Yeah, he said that. Dog, if you don't want to do this anymore, why are you still so committed to icing out David Hogg when his idea is, hey, let's primary the fucking weak and useless Democrats to get some real ones in there that will, utilize the social media game and not just like cede ground to Republicans constantly and actually, like, instead of being disingenuous, vacuous snakes who change their political beliefs based on the convenience of the moment, how about we get people that have some actual principles so that they have real drive to realize a positive political agenda that bodes for a future of this country? And Ken Martin was like, no. Not only no in a sniveling, crying, whining tone. And he fucking, like, he had the fucking gall to, like, say, I'm just a birthday boy. I've only been on the job for 100 days. With 14 years of experience. He copped to as much himself. Ken Martin copped to the exact incompetence that, like, David Hogg and basically everybody else in the country takes issue with, right? Like, by his own admission, I'm constructing this narrative using nothing but what Ken Martin has said about himself, is that he's been on the job for 100 days, and somehow, despite 14 years of prior experience in politics as a chair of political organizations, still somehow does not have his sea legs, which means he's copping to not having done anything despite being in this game for, like, fucking forever. Oh, Fallback ITA 27. Thank you for the raid. Raiders, welcome to chat. I was just going off on Ken Martin for you know, crying. And thank you for Fallback ITA for the follow. Did it not show the raid? It should have showed the raid notification. I'll have to fix that. See, it's shit like that that made me register as an independent when I was 18. Like, come on. Yeah, and that's also one of the things that makes me think, like, this party really needs to go, man. Ow. Anyway, how are y'all doing, huh? Raiders that just got here. Be prepared for a lot of tonal whiplash, alright? That's kind of the defining feature of my stream. This is a bad idea. It was a bad idea, but it worked anyway. I'm almost not interested in even reading the rest of the Politico article, you know? No idea why I had 6 viewers, but it's dinner time. Your name was funny enough to deserve the raid. Have you talked about the new protest? Not yet. Well, thank you, Fallback ITA. Tonal whiplash? You mean schizo ramblings? Yes, that's exactly what I mean. Old man yells at Democratic Party for the 1 millionth time. But by old man, I mean guy who's 24 years old. Fucking YouTube Zoomer bullies old man, and by old man I mean 51. Not that old. Get those damn Democrats off my lawn. That's fucking true. I guess I can talk about the protests. It's gonna be kind of limited insofar as, like, what information I'm able to glean. At least it isn't Zoomer Historian. Yeah, I've heard some things about that guy. None of them good. Let's here we go. Let me open this, excuse me. Al Jazeera article. LA immigration protest clashes. Someone that cop shot near a lady reporter. Not just near her, he shot her directly with a rubber bullet. Yeah, there have been protests happening in LA. I guess since this is like a continually developing situation, I could give a loose recap of it and then talk about some specific things that have happened recently. So first things first, I think things started on Thursday, at which time I was at the beach. Oh, this isn't gonna work. I just kind of realized where I was going. Basically, ICE there was like a federal detention facility in LA. I know, very specific. LA is fucking huge. But people went out and protested it. They were protesting against ICE having a detention facility there, that sort of thing. And then ICE started to, you know, be belligerent against the protesters. And things kind of escalated from there, with LAPD getting involved, albeit to a more limited extent than ICE. Apparently, the LAPD was like, yeah, these guys are actually fucking up everything. And you have to be pretty unhinged to make the LAPD seem like less insane by comparison, but, you know, ICE clears that bar. So that was happening, and of course, the moment the media got wind of it, they started manufacturing consent, by which I mean, you know, since mostly media in America is just propaganda, they started being like, oh wow, these rowdy, insane, crazy, violent protesters have set enough cars on fire to count on one hand, and they said nothing about the protesters that had been brutalized from the cops, you know, various arrests having been made, that sort of thing. And then the Trump administration actually sent in the National Guard. They sent in the National Guard, which is it's like the domestic, like by default, I think it's the domestic detachment of the United States military. And the National Guard has been even less belligerent than either the LAPD or the ICE agents, because like they're trained to like not shoot first, and nobody's like shooting at them or being super fucking violent towards them, so they're just kind of hanging around. And then the before the Marines got involved, because the Marines are now involved, video started to surface of the police brutality occurring. Of course, people had to resort to doing like citizen journalism, because, you know, journalism is dead in this country. And one particular video was what was it, News 9? It was a CNN affiliate from Australia, and a lady reporter was standing kind of in front and to the side of a line of cops that were, you know, lining the street. And they had their weapons out with rubber bullets, and you see the cop on the end look at her, turn, aim his gun at her for no fucking reason at all, just because they felt like it, and then shoot her in the leg directly with a rubber bullet. Understand that rubber bullets are very, very dangerous. They still travel at extremely high velocity. What you're supposed to do, to use them as a less lethal, you know, quote unquote, means of like crowd control, is shoot them at the ground in front of people so that they ricochet and lose a little bit of velocity, thus momentum. So people still get a big boo-boo, but, you know, they don't like get seriously in danger of dying, at least not usually. Still a form of state violence, but, you know, this cop couldn't even manage that, or I guess just didn't feel like it, because he knew not only that there would be no punishment, but that what happened next would indeed be what happened next, which is the later reporter was on with the other anchors. There were a couple other like news anchors. They were like, "Oh my goodness, you know, you got shot. That's crazy." And in a very, very bizarre open display of pro-cop framing, they sort of in hushed tones gave her the wink and the nudge, like, yeah, you know, the cops don't usually do this, right? Because you didn't do anything. You're usually one of the good ones. It was, you know, very unusual for the cop to do something like that. You know, they would never do that. And of course, you know, the protesters were all being so rowdy, of course. You know, it basically, like, I could practically see, as I was watching it, it was a very strange feeling, the talking points they had been handed from the top down. You must adhere to this narrative, otherwise there will be serious consequences for your career, right? And so that was, like, created a very tense situation where everybody had very plainly seen that the cops just fucking turned and took a shot for the lulz at this woman who was reporting on the scene. You know, yeah, they had a very hard time making excuses in a way that makes me think that, like, some people might be radicalized by that that instance specifically, to say nothing of others. And now the protests have continued to go on for now I believe like a sixth day. We are in the sixth day of protests in LA. And the Marines are now there. And in a very hilarious twist of fate, because of all things, the Third Amendment of the United States Constitution that prohibits the quartering of troops in people's residences, and combine that with the incompetence of the administration that just sort of on a dime decided, fuck it, send in the National Guard and the Marines. We don't care about making logistical preparations beforehand, just send them in. We don't care about the approval of the governor, send them in. They're sleeping on the fucking floor of federal facilities. You know? The National Guard and the Marines. And of course, for those not in the loop, the Marines are the branch of the U.S. military that eats crayons. Or so I'm told. But, you know, that checks out if you've seen the Marines get up to Marine behavior. Just LA could be its own state from how big it is. Oh yeah, geographically LA is huge, but it's only home to like 13 million people. Like, LA composes a not insignificant geographical portion of the entire state of California, you know? Whereas Tokyo, the greater Tokyo metropolitan area, you know, the metro area of Tokyo, largest metro area in the world, is about the same size with more than 3 times as many people, estimates being 38 million as of 9 years ago. And the city has only actually grown since then because people moved to the city. LA is very, very spread out. It's been a while, but I have been there before. Getting Marines in civilian settings like Hey Nigga Baboon and AK-47. And I'm sure that was actually the intent, right? The reason that, like, the reason that the government sent in the Marines is because the National Guard wasn't being violent enough. The objective of this was basically to go in and crack some skulls because this administration is unhinged, right? But, you know, the National Guard are too disciplined and well-trained for that. And they also don't treat absolutely everything like a combat scenario. So they had to send in a more insane branch of the U.S. military, and that means the Marines. Because, you know, they sniff glue and they eat crayons. To be fair, Japanese architecture is also very compact compared to American architecture. Yes, that is also a big factor. Lots, like property lots and buildings in America, are very big and wide, and not super tall. And in Japan, things are quite a bit smaller. We live under fascism now, and incompetency and evil is their policy. And I am profoundly thankful that they are that incompetent. They treat it like a torture game? Yeah, that's true. In fact, this is a decently well-documented historical phenomenon. Ever since the creation of police forces back in the 19th century, or I guess, you know, the 19th century and 20th century is when they really started happening, but this does have a phenomenon. We call it a cop riot, where things are largely, like, peaceful until the cops arrive on the scene, in which case the cops instigate violence, and a lot of times events that we know as riots in history are cop riots, where violence is instigated and mostly engaged in by the police force, by the agents of the state, against protesters who, for the most part, are simply marching and demonstrating in large numbers as a show of leverage, you know? It's very, very infrequent that protests are characterized by a large amount of violence. It's not completely unheard of, but at such a stage where protests are sufficiently violent that they cease to be, like, overwhelmingly peaceful, usually that's the point where we recognize that a revolution is happening rather than a more ordinary protest movement, you know? And interestingly enough, the the bit about violence not being very widespread until the police get there also applies to violence on the part of the protesters, right? Looting is not like you know, I will defend looting, don't get it twisted, but even in most cases where we could pretty fairly acknowledge that usually looting is not a great idea, it is the case that looting happens as a product kind of like a more immediate low trust environment. In the same way that like crime and violence break out as a result of like the social contract breaking down, the same thing applies to looting and property destruction and things like that. You have your usual kind of like rowdy block party scenarios, but then when the cops get there, things get worse because it's clear that a lot of the social contract revolves around people's relations to production and the state. When the state shows up to enact violence on people, then the social contract between the two groups fails. It breaks down because the state has broken the social contract. And people at a protest looting and engaging in other riot-adjacent activities are simply an acknowledgement of that one-sided breakdown of the social contract. Does that make sense? Basically, something rioting is the language of the unheard, but more so it's like rioting only really happens when the social contract breaks down to such extent that people are desperate enough to do things that would otherwise be a really bad idea and get them in a lot of trouble and potentially be harmful to the people around them. Story of Behind Workers' Day is an example of this. I bet the cops don't even care. They're like, oh boy, more people to torture. Yeah, the cops actually really like it when the social contract breaks down in that sort of way, because while every cop might not be straightforwardly a Nazi, a lot of them are very hopped up on the thin blue line rhetoric and the thin blue line narrative. Any chance they get to pretend they're the big boy and the savior of the city and whatever, basically I'm saying that cops have like Marvel-ified thin blue line brain, and when they see like a one car on fire or like a shop that's being looted, they're like, oh boy, perfect, an opportunity to justify the thin blue line argument, you know, even though their presence is the reason that those things are happening. You know, reminder, all of these protests were started by the fact that ICE was present in this community and had a detention center there where they were holding people who were allegedly migrants. And I say allegedly because they weren't actually all migrants. A lot of them were Americans. They have a savior complex together with right-wing propaganda. Yeah, that's another very succinct way of putting it. You know, there's a very well-defined savior complex there. It's been like a really quickly developing series of events. The mayor of LA, Karen Bass, has talked about it, striking actually sometimes kind of different tones. One, a couple press events being much more slated towards you know, preferring the cops or whatever. One appearance she actually kind of defended the protests in concept, but recently it seems like she kind of capitulated, the city leadership kind of capitulated to the framing of the cops and all the really reactionary media outlets. And although the guy is a fucking snake and shares the phrenology of most car salespeople, Gavin Newsom has been pretty resolute in his opposition to the Trump administration, if only because Gavin Newsom is probably like very self-interested and grifty. But, you know, the governor of the state of California has been like, fuck you, actually. Please take the National Guard and the Marines and piss off. Also, I will sue you, you know, for whatever the fuck that's worth, right? And I kind of expect more to happen in the next couple of days. My predictions have been incorrect before, but, like, you know, I don't know. I think it'd be pretty bad if the protest just kind of fizzled out with nothing happening, but I feel like they're not done yet. Imagine being a reporter, you get shot in the leg and your friends and your colleagues say, "Don't you dare try to defend your actions on air or you're fired." Yeah, it's like, you know, she got shot and then they brought her on air and urged her to apologize to the policemen and defend the police's actions after they had shot her in the leg. Again, with a rubber bullet, but still, those things can kill you. It's kind of like with blanks. Let's see what USA Today has to say on the subject. Hundreds arrested in LA as an LA protest as Hegseth hints at more deployments. Live updates. Okay, so they might be escalating even further. It would be kind of like it would be an interesting turn of fate if the government legitimately decided to try to militarily occupy the city of Los Angeles. It seems like that might be the direction they're going, right? More troop deployments. That seems to be what this is naturally building towards, right? 4,000 National Guardsmen, and thus far, I think 700 U.S. Marines. Trying to manufacture that consent. Oh, yeah. I guess, you know, it seems like with the incompetence of the administration, sometimes it's hard to get a read on their actions because they don't even know what they're doing. Also, that was a sick, nasty POW dodge. But, like, I guess in such instances, I'm forced to kind of defer to what this could be building towards from a systemic point of view. And I guess a military buildup in a city where protests are happening could mean one of two things, right? It could mean another Kent State, which doesn't seem to be the case, at least not yet, or it could mean like an occupation of the city, which might be more likely. Another George Floyd. I mean, maybe, but like these protests, keep in mind, I remember when the Black Lives Matter protests were happening in 2020 and 21, mostly 2020. Those were actually more violent because the protests were straightforwardly against the police, like as a concept. Those were even like more fraught with violence, even on the side of the protesters, than the LA protests. And I don't think that, like, I don't know what I was reaching for. I guess, like, I still defend those, and the same tone was struck by most of the news media about, like, oh, there's so much rioting and whatever. I don't think that, like, they're building towards another George Floyd. I don't think so, because the George Floyd protests were sparked by an incident, like an inciting incident of a guy being killed by the cops, right? Like, the inciting incident has kind of already happened here. It seems like the government's just continually escalating it, and I feel like that's what they're escalating towards. I don't know. Yeah. They don't care about that part of it. They want the culture power wave. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, that's kind of the more dangerous, like, long-term consequence, right? It seems like genuinely every news media outlet in America has fallen in line at this stage. And with them all in line with the sort of right-wing culture war narrative, with the thin blue line, with the, like, God, even with the, like, casual white supremacy and, like, migrant invasion rhetoric, it seems like it's only a matter of time until they start deconstructing the progressive, like, cultural hegemony that the United States has had for some time. You know? Because there's no counter-narrative. When you have a narrative and no counter-narrative, it doesn't matter how transparently false and full of, like, holes and lies one narrative is. If that's the only narrative, people will believe it. I guess maybe that's what this is building towards. Maybe they're trying to escalate it to try to just manufacture more consent. That, I guess maybe that might be what all this is building towards, is just any opportunity to manufacture more consent on the part of these systems. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is like, yeah, that'll show them. Send in the troops. Get our boys in, not boys in blue. The boys in blue are already out there. Boys in green, or whatever the fuck. Get our war fighters out there, right? Weak people. Back as a child, I was given no lefty narrative, and I still fight for my ideas against my conservative parents. Oh yeah, and I fully agree. These, you know, we are talking about very people of very weak will, and I feel like that's been cultivated by a number of things. But yeah, it's just kind of a sociological fact that a lot of people are like that, and you know, an established narrative is a mold that you have to kind of go out of your way to break, and some people do that, but it's very difficult. So a lot of people won't. You know. That's also kind of why I get so mad at the Democratic Party for being so, not just incompetent, but having an ideological opposition to being competent, is because, like, there is sufficient power in the Democratic Party and affiliated party institutions to build a counter-narrative, to leverage, you know, media power and messaging power to reify cultural, like, progressive cultural hegemony, and to basically, like, radicalize people to the left, away from barbarism, you know, and towards socialism, but they're just not doing it. They just don't feel like it. And in fact, they don't feel like it so hard that they will prevent you from doing it if you feel like it. You know? Takes like 1 minute to convince the average person that I'm a super genius, and it disturbs me. Oh yeah, dude, like, if you're in this chat and you understand, like, at least 50% of what I'm talking about, congratulations. You might very well be one of the most well-educated people in this fucking country. You know? And that's saying something, because, like, dog, I do not have a PhD. I have a bachelor's degree in anthropology, and I'm trained in archaeological field methods, but, like, that's it. You know? I'd be getting mogged by academics of yesteryear, like fucking Albert Einstein, people like that. They would mog me, but, you know, this is where we're at right now. They think, like, you can't go near socialism. That's like Hitler. Not joking, they think like that. Oh yeah, I've seen your average lib post on Blue Sky, you know, where the Trump administration does the most extremely capitalistic and fascistic things imaginable, and they'll be like, wow, look at these bunch of commies. What are you, some kind of Joseph Stalin? Are you looking a little bit like Fidel Castro? You know? And I was like, wow, thank you, liberals. And then, of course, Twitter is like a radioactive zone where all the conservatives live. You know, the more intelligent among them are the grifters that, you know, pump out the same slop day after day, and the rest are reply guys that genuinely, I think, lack an ability to think for themselves. And again, the ones that can think for themselves are either grifters or authentically, like, Nazis. Whew. Oh shit, they've put a curfew into place. LAPD arrested 225 people on Tuesday night after Mayor Karen Bass's curfew went into effect. Most of the arrests were on failure to disperse charges. Okay, so not that serious. A few others involved curfew violations. Possession of a firearm and assault on a police officer. Yeah, that seems likely. Bunch of dumbasses. I think I'm surprised it didn't happen earlier. Yeah, it is kind of surprising that it's like, I guess 6 days in that this is happening. Maybe they're trying to quiet things down so that this doesn't become something bigger. You know, that might be it. That might be part of what this is. Like, at the same time, they're trying to, on one front, escalate to manufacture more consent. They could also be trying to simultaneously quiet things down enough that other cities don't get any ideas. I actually did see there have been some protests in other cities around the country in solidarity with people in LA. These principally, like, anti-ICE protests. Of course, it's like, again, it's another kind of disillusioning thing to see that there's so much less ideological discipline and so much less of an understanding of what the protests are about. They're just kind of protesting against, you know, government tyranny, which is a perfectly fine thing to protest, but even still, you know, the threat of such protests against authoritarian crackdown spreading is a very real one, and it could become something larger, like a proper social movement, you know? Like the dark side, they're not coherent, they're just the ideology of evil. Yeah, exactly. So they'll act in some kind of contradictory ways. I think this might be one of those. You know, it's like, oh, you know, let's send in the military to show them who's boss, which is very escalatory. But then also, like, the more rational actors understand, no, we need to quiet things down, so let's do stuff like a curfew and basically do the whole catch and release thing, where you get arrested, but they don't actually intend to, like, fully prosecute the case. They'll, like, arrest you on certain charges like failure to disperse, violation of curfew, and then they kind of, like, release you later. Hexeth says deployments... Oh, hold up! Hexeth says deployments could expand beyond California. The fuck is this about? The federal government's deployment of National Guard troops could expand beyond LA, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said at a congressional hearing Wednesday in Washington. Part of it is getting ahead of a problem so that if in other places, if there are other riots in places where law enforcement officers are threatened, we would have the capability to surge the National Guard there if necessary. That is extremely escalatory. Dog, I remember when I was saying that, like, oh yeah, they might move to occupy LA. It might not even be just LA that they're trying to, like, militarily occupy, basically. You know? Hegseth also took a shot at Governor Newsom, of course, who has filed a suit against the Trump administration for sending in the National Guard. Thankfully, in most of those states, you have a governor that recognizes the needs for it, supports it, mobilizes it for himself or herself. Woke mentioned that there are women who are governors. Woke, Hegseth said. In California, unfortunately, the governor wants to play politics with it. I feel like that's a pretty big deal. Yeah, it's like they kind of they want the unrest to continue in a way to justify further crackdowns and seizure of power and stuff like that. You know, like consolidation of power. Oops. Maybe they are going to, like, occupy cities, basically, you know? Because an occupation doesn't take that many troops. I mean, to very completely and concretely occupy an area militarily. It's no lean feat, and it would take, you know, for somewhere as large as LA, it would take more than 4,700 people between the National Guard and the and the Marines. But understand that, like, police, especially in America, are basically already a militarily occupying force. Like, the police in America are basically already a military occupation because of the way that they operate, the equipment they have, and, like, the way they're trained. I don't know. I think if they really, really move in this direction, they might actually be able to do it. And I don't know how that would bode. In one respect, I guess the accelerationist side of me is like, haha, yes, you know, sicko looking through the window. Because if the government becomes progressively more openly authoritarian, then people will have a naturally stronger and stronger rejection of it, right? Like, nobody tends to respond well to their city being occupied by federal troops and police officers armed to the teeth, treating civilians like they are a wartime enemy. Which, of course, that is the relationship perpetually between the civilian population and the state, at least for the working class. But there's been more or less successful periods of smoothing that over. You know? This would be them kind of, like, no longer attempting to smooth it over. Be like, yeah, we don't exist to, like, help you. We're not here to help you. We're here to make sure you don't behave out of line and shoot you with a rubber bullet and arrest you on bullshit charges if you do. I don't know, man. This could have, like... Yeah, see, the more rational actors here. National Guard Major General clarifies military role in LA. It's really about protecting federal facilities and federal personnel as they do their job. You know? So, you have, like, the actual, like, actually more rational people, you know, National Guard officials saying, like, yeah, no, this is just about making sure that federal property, federal facilities aren't being damaged, and the implication being, as long as that's not happening, we're all fine and good. And of course, the protesters aren't going to do that. Like, that's a one-way ticket to being shot in the head, right? Like, so, you know, the National Guard's just going to kind of be there. They're like, all right, nobody's doing nothing, so we're just kind of here, you know? I guess that, you know, that's one of the apparent signs of a contradiction of motives there. Smart person realized it with the first account. Oh? I don't know if I take your meaning. That always extends less far out than I think it does. Alright, I'll just use this here. They're not your friends. Oh, yeah. Oh, perfect. Give me that. I somehow dodged that? That's kind of crazy. It's been a lot happened since the last time you live stream. Yeah. Yeah, there has been a lot of things. The Major General's name is even Sherman. That's so good. I love it. The 4,000 National Guard, 700 Marines deployed by Trump are receiving 2 days of training on civil unrest. That includes crowd control and protection of property. See, that's the purpose of the police. I don't know if this guy realizes what he's just admitted to, or if he realizes he's admitting to anything. The job of the police and the military, domestically, is crowd control and the protection of private property. They serve no other purpose. In fact, the state actually had to lump more responsibilities that are not integral to the police department onto the police department in order to justify their existence. That's why we have such a poor framework of mental health care in America, to the extent that we have one at all, is that there are like social workers that work with the police departments. So you have something on your chin? Yes, I have a band-aid. I cut myself shaving. Protests planned across the nation on June 14th. Oh boy. More protests. That ought to be fun. Why I don't shave. True. I forgot those things are wigglers, so they extend out a little bit, so I just get fucked up. Yeah. Usually, if I get shaving cuts, they're usually not that bad. In fact, it might be a sign that I need to switch out my razor. If you have a razor that's like a little bit duller, you're actually, as weird as it sounds, you're less at risk of getting shaving cuts if you have a very sharp razor. Once your razor gets more dull, it's kind of like more susceptible to snag at certain points or to like not be able to cleanly shave off a lot of the hair. So that increases the risk that you get a shaving cut. And in either case, I have noticed that I tend to get more shaving cuts, like when it's when it's duller, when I'm not using like a fresh razor. Yeah, the dull blade can get caught on your skin easier. Yeah, that's what it is. Okay, yeah. Oh, we both got the mushroom. Nice. You'll have to see it. I'm not getting that draft. Go around that thing. Weird air. Okay. Every blade, no matter what it's used for, keep it sharp. It also keeps you safe. Yes, that is true. Oh, I almost got that guy. That would have been a sick bomb snipe. Okay. Ended about where I started. That's fine. Hopefully I'll get a Switch 2 soon enough. That ends the, duration of the live stream. I talked about a fair few things. Oh, dude, it's called the No King's Day protest. That's fucking cool. For June 14th, with the aim to reclaim the American flag. All right, whoever organized these protests has been watching the Voss streams, all right? I know he talks a lot about the important political utility of waving the American flag. And I actually feel like this is a unique opportunity to explain why it's very useful to do so. Is America an evil white supremacist empire that has done unspeakable things to minorities and also keeps the third world in a miserable state? Yes. However, that is the American state. American civil society is capable of recognizing, yeah, that's bad actually. And the flags of nation states represent both the state and the civil society, the nation to which they belong. Thus, the American flag does not solely represent the government of America. That would be dumb. Does the French flag only represent the government of France? No. Does the Polish flag only represent the government of Poland? No. So the same rule applies to the United States flag. If people are waving a American flag at a left-wing protest, the message that sends is, you are imposters. You are not the real America. We are the real America. We are the heart and soul of this nation, and our cause is more correct from a perspective of national framing, from a position of like patriotic framing or whatever. Do I think flags are cringe still? I don't know, maybe a little bit, but I also like what Reddit vexillologists do to make like pretty flags and stuff. So yeah, there's a large amount of utility to waving flags like that, and we've seen this throughout history where there have been worker protests, left-wing protests in places like France, in places like Germany and Poland, and all throughout Europe. and other places, Algeria, Thailand, Vietnam, wherever, you see people waving their respective flags. At a French protest, you see people waving the French flag, you know? In fact, the lack of American flags could, in some way, make it easier to sort of manufacture consent against the protesters. While, obviously, they're still blatantly lying while doing this, the news media can very easily default to the line, oh, well, you don't see a lot of American flags, so they must be a bunch of plants. And that's transparently very dumb, but there are people that will believe that. And it'll be much easier to convince those people if there's not people waving American flags in the crowd. Again, death to America, Mal was right. Third worldism is pretty good, actually. But if you want to, these protests actually might be very cool if they succeed in reclaiming the American flag to a degree, because I fucking hate that conservatives just get to wave the American flag, because they fucking hate this country, dude. No one hates this country more than the demographic of people that have, over the 20th and 21st century, claimed the flag for themselves. The conservatives, the Christian nationalists that clothe themselves constantly in the flag, sporting various flag code violations, mind you. They hate this country. They oppose categorically anything that would make this country better, that would deliver on any of the, even the very lived up but pretty good promises that a lot of the constitutional framers and academics that were in charge of leading the revolution in this country had in mind, or I guess that co-opted it once it was already going, right? They're blatantly anti-American, and we are, at least contextually, pro-American, because we want this country to succeed, in that we want civil society to be healthy. We want people to live happy and fruitful lives. And to that end, waving the American flag at a protest can help. Again, because it's we're the real America, you're the fake America. You actually hate this country. I don't know, just a little bit of a spiel there. And that does actually make me kind of optimistic about these protests. No King's Day, flying the American flag, very, very, appropriate to the national spirit of a lot of the founding narratives about America. Commitment to nonviolence, etc., etc. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, look, I think the hope for this is that the police show up and make a scene, and everybody knows that it's the police that showed up and made a scene, right? Picture this, right? It's like a perfect media framing device. A protester sporting an American flag maybe did something that got on the wrong side of a cop's ego that day. And so the cop starts pepper spraying them and bashing them with a riot shield. Somebody takes a picture. Now all the news headlines can't fucking avoid the image of this guy holding an American flag being beaten up by a cop, right? That's a good message. It's good tactics is what it is. Anyways, I have Schizo posted for long enough. Hopefully that was enjoyable to you folks. I had fun, so... Very apropos of the protest, I'm going to send you all over to the Hasanabi broadcast, because he was actually at the protest very in a very e-boy kind of manner, but it's real world activism, and I really appreciate it, because a lot of people watch us on stream, and so a lot of people are seeing those protests that might have otherwise not, And particularly people watch this YouTube channel. Anyways, see y'all later. Okay, bye.